Hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer and today's review of the real grade Evangelion Unit-01 is brought to you by Canadian Gundam. Canadian Gundam is your one-stop shop for all your Playmo and Gunpla needs here in North America. Kits, tools, and so much more, Canadian Gundam has your back. When checking out, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network for 10% off. Now, if this slick neon behemoth of a model kit is unfamiliar to you, let me fill you in. Neon Genesis Evangelion aired back in 1995, giving the mecha genre a strange but riveting facelift. Diving deep into mental illness trauma and the MC, Shinji Ikari's aptitude for running, Neon Genesis Evangelion still stands today as one of anime's all-time greats. Joining the ranks of Gundam, Macross, while influencing such works as Gurren Lagann and Rekka 7, Neon Genesis Evangelion is an important part of mecha history, but also anime history at large. Now, the original series wouldn't be the last we've heard of Eva, with follow-up movies, a literal forest of manga, and more timelines than you can fathom. Eva is still going strong today, with the rebuild movies continuing, with one coming up very soon. Now, speaking of rebuilds, this kit feels very, very much closer to the updated HD version of Unit 1 than its 1995 counterpart. Well, technically, nothing major has changed outside of better fidelity and proportions. It is pretty easy to see which one is closer to the real-life plastic we're looking at today. The kit itself is rather interesting in terms of build, with a sleeker, more organic design than a lot of Gundam designs that we see. This aesthetic strays pretty far from the traditional blocky Gundams that we've seen in line so far, and it is really in a class of its own. It's really different, and that differentness does good and bad, we'll say. Some of it does have to deal with the proportions, some of it is how the joints are designed, because most of these are entirely unique in terms of engineering to the Evangelions. Since they're so drastically different, we're not going to see any reused parts, any PC pieces, almost actually no pre-built inner frame. This is all pretty much like a mini master grade in a way, but not in the best way possible, I should say. I mean, everything from head to toe is specific to this kit. Now, of course, the other Evangelions that have come out since will share similarities, but this was the first of its kind and the only one of its kind at that moment. Now, it has some pretty interesting gimmicks, from the sliding entry plug, which kind of just gets lost when you drop it in there, but it's a cool feature, to the sneaker-like feet, which is actually really cool. For big feet, you think this would be a little bit more balanced, but unfortunately it's not, and you'll see some of that in the review. Outside of that, this is just visually stunning. I do have to say this is one of the most fun kits in terms of photography or photographing that I've messed with in months. That being said, it has, I won't say deteriorated, but there are a couple of specific joints that are just the bane of anyone trying to pose this as existence, and it's mostly the hips, I will say. Part of it is somewhat due to the proportions with all of the lanky leg portions and such, but largely the way the hips connect in is just not solid and does cause problems, and I think one of my legs might be slightly loose now, but that can be fixed pretty easily. Almost every section of this kit has something interesting, even if it's interesting in a bad way. You have the jaw and the head, which moves, which is great, but it also moves really far. There's not like anything to stop it, so it can look like it's like broken its jaw, but it is nice that it opens. It's easy to recreate scenes with that gimmick. The forearm armor covers are very interesting. I don't know why they did it this way. There's really nothing crazy in there. The way it's built is pretty different, and I think part of that might be due to the slimmer proportions of the arms, not giving the engineers a lot of room to work with, but it works pretty well. No gimmick or moving parts there, just something interesting. You have the 3 different joints in the torso, which are really good for movement, but some of the balance issues come in there as well, just because of how much you can move it. And I would say when you're building this, pay attention to those, because when building this, I had to take it apart pretty much every time I built one of these little pieces because I did them backwards or wrong or connected the next one wrong, and it was a whole process. Just pay attention. Then, of course, you have like the long legs, which, like I said, aren't bad, but you do run into a couple of issues in terms of its center of gravity not being very low, so it can get a little finicky when you're trying to pose it. I can wholeheartedly say if you're getting bored and tired of regular Gundams in the real grade line, this is a pretty good alternative. Yes, it has its problems, but it's definitely not bad in terms of a build. It's pretty interesting, and even the stuff that is a little bit more frustrating does have purpose and some benefit in most instances. While the manual and level of complexity aren't anything really new, the design mostly is a breath of fresh air. Some of the hotness of this little finicky thing does wear off pretty quickly, but it is such a different looking design that once it's built, after you've gone through the build process, you're rewarded with something visually very interesting. And now that you've got that built and you get to look at this monster, we can talk about how big this kit is, because it is it's so big. I'll give you some reference here. It's hard to kind of find the exact heights, but generally it's thought that the Evas in universe are about 75 meters tall. For reference, the new Gundam, which is like the big boy of at least UC Gundams, is only about 23 meters tall. So this thing is almost 3 new Gundams tall. It's insane how big this is, and you see that reflected here in the model kit. The box doesn't specifically say anything about being 1:144 scale, but it kind of feels like it. And you can just see even like something in the Mark II here is so much smaller. Like it's almost half the height. It's insane how much taller this is. And a lot of it is the proportionality of it. The longer legs, of course, are going to make it taller. Then you have to kind of elongate the torso as well. And the way it's designed, it has to be a little bit longer. So there are reasons it's this tall, but it's just so big and it's so hard to get over with it being this big and having this color scheme and this really different design, at least in regards to Gundam. If you're putting this on a shelf of other real grades, it's going to stand out in almost every conceivable way. Now, of course, if you didn't get the DX version, you just get the regular version, it's still going to have that because the base unit itself doesn't change between the two. But if you add the DX version, its little transport thingy, it's even taller. Now, I will say this, while it is kind of a cool gimmick, isn't great in terms of fitting it in there. The slots are there, they fit, but nothing really locks in, so you can kind of tell some things aren't exactly in, like one of the shoulder pads in the shot's not fully in the base, but it is cool that it's there. You also get the AT field, which is nice. I don't think I'll ever display it, and like I said, this has gotten finickier over time, so trying to pose it in this video was more difficult than like my original photos I had taken. So there are a few issues there. There's a couple of things I think I might need to tighten up. Mostly the hip joint. That's the only major problem I can say. If you're getting this kit to be wary of, is the way the hip connects in. It's this weird circle, or I guess, yeah, circular joint that has a track, but so that you can put it into the hips, or you put the hips into like the torso base, you have to have an empty spot in the track and then rotate it. The only problem is it doesn't lock. So every time you move the legs, it moves that, and then things start sliding out and it doesn't hold. So let's just say that is the biggest problem. I'm not going to say it's a deal breaker, honestly, because if you're really not posing it a whole lot, it's not going to matter to you. But generally speaking, if you like to get kits down off your shelf and pose them and photograph them or just play with them, this one over time might be a bit more of a problem. Now, of course, if you're an Evangelion fan, this is a must buy. If you're a real grade fan, this is a must buy. if you're someone who can appreciate different engineering, it's a must buy. If you are just getting into the real grade line, I would say start with something else unless this really catches your eye though, because I've built quite a few real grades, a couple master grades, high grades for a long time, and this gave me a couple of moments where I had to either take things apart, rebuild them, or kind of just really sit and stare at a page for 5 or 10 minutes to figure out what is what, because it's not poorly labeled, it's just things are so different and fit together in a very unique way that it is a little more complex. That being said, if you've built a couple real grades, please dive in. This is such a fun kit. Photographing it is good, even if it is a little finicky. Once you get a couple of those joints worked out, especially the hips, not a really big deal. But that has been my overall thought, my review of this whole thing. If you want to see some more photos, of course, there'll be a few more at the end of this video here. But generally speaking, I love this Evangelion, and I think you will too. This has been the Spicer, this has been the Gunpla Network, and as always, friends, keep on building.